Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are around the world. Welcome to our webinar today, and thank you very much for joining. My name is Sherry Cohen. I am the president of the Hepatitis B Foundation, and I am delighted to be joined today by my colleagues as we talk about the importance of including the patient voice into management guidelines and into the management and treatment of hepatitis B. Just a couple of housekeeping remarks. The webinar today is going to be recorded and it will be sent once it's ready to everyone who registered, and it will also be posted on the Hepatitis B Foundation YouTube page. All participants are in listen-only mode, and you can see that there's a Q&A box. If you have any questions, please, throughout the webinar today, post them in that box, and we are going to have a Q&A panel session at the end, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. It is my pleasure to introduce my colleagues today and the speakers and panelists on today's seminar. Catherine Freeland is Associate Director of Public Health at the Hepatitis B Foundation. Sue Wong is the Director for the Center for Asian Health at St. Barnabas Medical Center, a clinician who treats and manages hepatitis B, and also Senior Advisor for Global Health at the Hepatitis B Foundation. Wendy Lowe is a patient advocate and a storyteller for the Hepatitis B Foundation, a voice for people living with hepatitis B, and also a health and wellness coach. Danjuma Ada is Executive Director of the Center for Initiative and Development and also Shagro Care Trust in Nigeria, and he is immediate past president of the World Hepatitis Alliance. Cami Graham is Assistant Professor of Infectious Disease, Primary Care in the Division of Infectious Disease at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and Harvard Medical School, and also serves in an advisory capacity for the Hepatitis B Foundation. And Kenneth Kabagambe is the founding executive director of the National Organization for People Living with Hepatitis B in Uganda. He is the founder of the Africa Hepatitis Initiative and also the inaugural chair of the Global Community Advisory Board for Hepatitis B Foundation. Next slide, please. The Hepatitis B Foundation is an international nonprofit organization. We are dedicated to improving the quality of life for everyone living with hepatitis B and Delta and liver cancer, and also to support and find a cure for hepatitis B. We actually do have about 60 researchers down the hall from me in the labs right now working to find better treatments and hopefully a cure for hepatitis B. In the Hepatitis B Foundation, we focus primarily on public health research, public health interventions, outreach, and advocacy strategies to help improve access to hepatitis B screening, hepatitis D screening and diagnosis, also treatment and linkage to care, but really also focusing on improving the quality of life for people living with hepatitis B worldwide and working on anti-stigma and anti-discrimination. For the past 33 years, we have really tried to elevate the voices of people living with hepatitis B, and that's why we're here today. Next slide, please. The goal of today's webinar is to share lived experiences and treatment preferences, and to hear from key stakeholders on the importance of sharing these experiences and integrating experiences, values, and preferences into medical management and professional and medical society guidelines for hepatitis B. Next slide. This webinar is a companion piece to our recently published commentary in the Lancet Gastroenterology and Hepatology. Next slide. And we want to thank Lancet Gastroenterology and Hepatology and their editors for understanding how important this is and for helping us have a space where multiple stakeholders around the world can read about the importance of the lived experiences and voices. So what we want to do is make sure that people who have hepatitis B are meaningfully integrated into testing, linkage to care, and care and treatment. We must make sure that people with lived experiences are partners at every step of the way. And this is not a new concept. I mean, we do this for many other diseases and condition states. It's just not meaningfully done in the hepatitis B world and hasn't been done in the hepatitis B world universally. And so what we want to do is start the conversation and talk about what some of the challenges are currently and how we can bring patient voice and patient preferences and values to the table. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Catherine Freeland.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for the introduction, and good morning, afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining us in this discussion, and I'm happy to be here to share some of the data that we collected last year for hepatitis B values and preferences that was used to inform the World Health Organization hepatitis B guidelines. And this was also conducted with other partners, including some of the partners that are serving as panelists on the line today. So we're happy to share just a bit of those results. And just to give you a bit of background on the content of the survey, it was launched last year in March of 2023, and it was a self-administered, self-reported survey in English language. And it was really working to understand patient current treatment experiences, management experiences, provider interactions, and preferences for provider interactions, and values and preferences related to the full care continuum of hepatitis B. And in terms of care continuum we mean from experiences with diagnostics all the way on to the ongoing management. In terms of who responded to our survey and where this information that I'll be presenting to you is coming from, you can see from this map here, the dark blue and the light blue shaded countries are who responded to our survey, with the top 5 countries represented listed here, with Nigeria representing, followed by the United States, Ghana, India, Uganda, and the Philippines. And we just want to take a moment to also appreciate every single person who helped us in responding to this survey, because it really was important to inform guideline developers and will be used in the future. And we'll continue to expand upon this. And this is really a way for people with lived experience to share their personal stories and experiences and preferences, so we can use that information to help leadership in guideline committees to really use that information for the development of these tools and guidelines. In 2015, the World Health Organization guidelines for hepatitis B recommended regular monitoring to detect liver cancer every 6 months, every 12 months to assess liver enzyme, hepatitis B DNA, e antigen, and toxicity monitoring as well. Most respondents to this survey reported accessing care every 1 to 2 years and do not have regular providers, or only go when they have a hepatitis B specific complaint. People responding to this survey also potentially have better access to healthcare because they're potentially connected to global civil society organizations like the Hepatitis B Foundations and others. But you can tell that there's a diversity in the individuals that responded in terms of where they're coming from. And just to note that those individuals also face different challenges based on where they are. But just to share some of the open-ended responses from people from a couple of different areas that we thought really depict some of the challenges in terms of the management guidelines, and then how they're actually implemented on the ground. Some individuals, an individual from Malawi noted, "I don't even know what to do or who to visit," noting really a gap in information and dissemination of information on what management looks like for them. Additionally, another individual said, "It seems like most healthcare facilities in Africa, Zambia to be specific, are not fully aware of how to treat patients with hepatitis," noting a real gap in care and service delivery on the ground. In terms of how people were currently experiencing treatment for hepatitis B, about 37% were currently on antiviral therapy, and you can see from the chart below which type of antiviral therapy they were on. And then you can also see from this blue box here who prescribed the medication. Really, I just want to highlight, majority are getting that prescribed by a specialist, noting some of the challenge with the decentralization of hepatitis B care and service delivery. So most people likely have challenges in terms of having to travel to a specialist to get that treatment access. 12% reported getting that care or treatment from a general practitioner or primary care provider for hepatitis B. And then in terms of why treatment was recommended by a provider, most had reported an elevated DNA or viral load, 30% because a doctor told them to start treatment, 11% wanted to reduce the risk of liver damage or liver cancer. And you can see 8% had high ALT, AST, and some had signs of liver damage. Additionally, in terms of their current treatment and management experiences and the reasons for people being on medication or not being on medication, You can see that many reported that their provider does not recommend medication to them, but others significantly reported challenges in costs, not being able to afford medication. And you can see this reflected in some of the open-ended responses that we received from the survey. An individual from Nigeria at 32 said he cannot afford the cost of medication and wouldn't want to stop after starting. Another individual similarly said that the drug is not available to them in both Ghana and Nigeria. Individuals also said that they sometimes skip their medication because it may finish and will have to wait for 3 to 6 days before they can get it again. So really highlighting some of the significant challenges in accessing medications for people with hepatitis B. We asked questions about provider engagement and how people were engaged with in terms of their communications for reasons to starting treatment or not being on treatment for hepatitis B. And really overall, we found that people were not really engaged with their providers, and it wasn't really a shared decision-making necessarily when it came to wanting to start or stop treatment. You can see further that providers were, and about 40% of them were explaining that there were options in terms and in choices in terms of treatment for hepatitis B. Others were asked if they were, if their provider asked if they wanted to start hepatitis B treatment, and many, over half reported that the provider did not engage with them. But really the important thing here, I think, from this slide and this conversation is really the overwhelming majority noted that they wanted to be engaged actively in the choices around management and treatment for hepatitis B. And you can see that a significant proportion of those individuals responded with wanting to be actively engaged. So I think that's a key message for this. Additionally, just highlighting some other qualitative open-ended responses that we received from the survey, highlighting some of the challenges for people living with hepatitis B, really around access to medication again, access to hepatitis B testing. Many noted challenges in the costs associated with the ongoing monitoring of hepatitis B testing. Many suggested or requested that hepatitis B treatment be accessible like HIV medication, and also point of care testing was also suggested as a important point for making the ease of testing applicable on the ground. They also suggested having knowledgeable healthcare workers who understand the disease was something that was really emphasized and a major gap in service delivery. Others suggested most times clients are not told their test results, they do not need treatment. One individual noted, why not start treatment rather than prevent it at the stage where the case is now serious? Why start treatment when sometimes people already have complications? So really highlighting some of these challenges. So overall, some of the key messages that we found from this survey were that healthcare providers are not actively involving patients in some of this shared decision-making regarding treatment and management. However, patients do want to be actively involved in this decision-making, particularly around treatment initiation. In terms of the patient's open-ended responses, there were significant barriers around testing services and treatment services, mostly because of the cost barriers associated with those. And individuals requested simplicity of service delivery, including point of care testing made available, and suggested testing and treatment initiation be models with cost coverage similar to HIV be considered for hepatitis B as well. They also requested simplified guidelines and accessible treatment, and noted the implications of a surface antigen positive test results leading to stigma and discrimination, and that having a significant role in poor health outcomes and socioeconomic consequences associated with hepatitis B. So the next steps for this work that we're doing is continue to gather treatment and management preference information from people with lived experience. We plan on launching an adolescent survey to look at adolescent data at the end of March. Continue really advocacy efforts to expand inclusion of people with lived experience within these treatment guidelines, especially as new treatment guidelines are being formed at this moment. And we hope that you'll all be a part of that conversation and help us in this information gathering, and also lift up your voices with us as we continue to move forward. If you have any thoughts or feedback, you can always reach out by email, and we hope to hear from you. I'll hand it back over to Dr. Cohen.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Much appreciated. And I would like to hand it over to the next speaker, but I don't know who it is. Catherine, who's our next speaker?
Yeah, I think we're just popping right into the panel.
Oh, we are popping right into the panel session. Okay, excellent. Well, I have a list of questions that came in before the webinar even started today. And as you can see, we have a lot of questions already. So why don't we get started? And I'm going to start by reaching out to each of our panelists. And I want to hear just a bit on your initial reflections, kind of where you think we are today, your reflections as we developed the commentary piece, and where you think can be a launching off point. And then from there, we're going to go into specific questions. So I'm going to just go in backwards order here. So Dr. Graham, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for letting me join this really important discussion about the involvement of people with lived experience. So I am a physician. I've provided care for people with hepatitis B for over 20 years, and I also have an immediate family member who lives with chronic hepatitis B. So I'm passionate about this, both on a personal and professional level. And I want to emphasize something that Sherry's kind of mentioned very briefly, which is what we're talking about today is not at all radical. Within the HIV guidelines for more than 20 years, people with lived experience and advocates have been intimately involved in guidelines like the DHS guidelines that have been sort of standard for many other guidelines around the world. And in hepatitis C, when we joined forces, IDSA, the Infectious Disease Society, with the International AIDS Society and the Liver Society, ASLD, on new hepatitis C guidelines, we integrated folks with lived experience, advocates. They were part of every working group, and it was very clear how the involvement of people with lived experience changes the conversations, changes the perspective of the clinicians that are involved, and makes for a richer, more applicable, less judgmental piece of work that means more for people. And I can expand on that if needed, but those were my initial remarks I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Danjuma, if you have any initial reflections you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. I think Dr. Graham rightly said what I wanted to say, that, I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The hepatitis space is where the HIV was like 20, 30 years ago. But now we need to learn from that. So I wonder why things are looking so difficult to have the voice of hepatitis B patients in clinical guidelines, whereas 25 so many years back, the HIV space, the activists and the patients were integrated into guidelines and also all development. So we don't need to really change the whole narrative, but we need to learn how did it work in the HIV space and how should it work now. So it's not really, I mean, one of the things, again, I want to reiterate again is that everybody living hepatitis B, one of the journey to treatment and, the shall I say, the winding road of treatment and the complexity, so to say, these are things that are always in the minds and the heart of people living hepatitis B. So the person living with hepatitis B is the best and the right person to share his preference, to share his ideas on the treatment he or she would want to have. No matter who you are as a clinician, you cannot, if you don't have the lived experience, you only would have the scientific knowledge. So it's best suited for a person with lived experience to be considered as an expert, all right, expert by living in sharing experiences. So we need to just maybe shorten the narrative by learning what happened in the HIV space and then roll it out in the hepatitis, especially hepatitis B space. That has been done for hepatitis C. I think the same thing needs to be done for hepatitis B. Thank you, Anova Chari.
Thank you very much. And Kenneth, I'm going to hand it over to you. I think you're still muted, Kenneth. There we go.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. I think, like colleagues have already mentioned, I think it is high time that patients get involved in the treatment guidelines. In fact, if these guidelines are meant to better their lives, I don't see why WHO and the international sources like ISO fail to recognize the importance of including the patient preferences in these guidelines. I have had an opportunity to be part of a clinical trial whereby people have actually been failing to adhere to, the treatment, and simply because they are only treated as recipients, but as not as stakeholders, who are taking part in this kind of clinical trial. So I believe respecting the patient's preferences in the development of these guidelines will actually take us to another stage of eliminating viral hepatitis by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. That is a very important point. Wendy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Delighted to be here too. I'm someone who's living with hepatitis B. I start out just to tell my story, to get the voice out there. But as in reason I've got involved to be a patient advocate is to really, as I understand the gap, right? This information that Dr. Freeland showed there between patients wanting a choice, being part of that shared decision making, and yet we're not part of it. So this whole theme of coming back to being a stakeholder. So I've recognized, like, as Kenneth has said, right, we have to be vocal and have to almost demand and request to be invited into the discussion. Now, I take a step back. What motivated me to do this is, like, it's appalling for me to think that as someone living with hepatitis B, I have the first person perspective. Like, I live with it. I know what's going on. How is it that there's decisions, important decisions that are being made upstream, through these guidelines development, but this very clear holistic experience may not be included. And so to me, this huge gap is unacceptable. And that's why I'm here today. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy, very much. And finally, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sue Wong.
Hi, everybody. That's a great question in terms of reflecting on this piece and just thinking about like how it's even come about. And I think a number of us have been involved with, I think this is really timely discussion because we're talking about a number of societies currently in the middle of developing their hepatitis B guidelines. And there hasn't been an update for many of them for many years. 2015 was the last one for WHO. From AASLD, it was 2018. And there's been quite a lot of work done on, how we're doing with elimination, how we're doing with treating people and diagnosing people. And it's clear that there's quite a gap in those areas. Huge gap in diagnosis, talking about 10% of people, and even bigger gap in treatment, only 2% of people with Hep B being treated. So I think it really begs the question, we've had these guidelines out there for so long. How come we haven't budged in these things, right? And I think this is where you turn and ask the community, what are your barriers? What's keeping you from getting tested? What's keeping you from accessing care? What's keeping you from starting treatment? And I think one of the, it's not one answer. There are many, many pieces to this puzzle, but one of the potential barriers / potential enablers is the treatment guidelines, right? They can have a really big impact and really open up treatment access, or they can make it difficult for treatment. And I think one of the things we've learned from HIV and Hep C, while they're not the same disease, we know, but that they've gradually moved down to simplification, because we know simplification, no matter what, increases access, and they become more universal, right? So I think a lot of people have been grappling, well, we probably need to expand our treatment a little bit more, because even people who are eligible, so many studies looking at insurance claims and looking at eligibility criteria have shown time and time again, even people who are eligible are not being treated. And so we really have to think about Are we worried about overtreating, or should we really maybe be concerned about undertreating patients? And as part of the development of these new guidelines, I think the patient community is hoping that we can really address those issues that are keeping us from treating those people who are eligible. And that patient community voice, I think, is really wants to be a partner to really get us. I believe we all have the same goal, but that we think we're a really critical partner. And a lot of studies have just shown that including the patient perspective community really helps uptake of medical recommendations, that we can actually help those medical recommendations have a bigger impact and get more uptake for those that, you know, are the kind of the target audience. So this is our hope and really our plea really at this time before the window closes. We know at some point the societies, AASLD and EASL, will conclude with their recommendations. And we really hope that this is our chance to kind of make a really big difference to get to elimination in 2030, which is 6 years away. So we just think this is a really critical time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to bring up a couple of points. It definitely seems like we are at an inflection point and we have an opportunity right now that we don't want to miss. So one thing that was mentioned is that a number of the professional societies are updating their guidelines now. They're in the process of doing it. We also, as Dr. Freeland showed, we have data. We and others around the world are now rigorously documenting patient preferences and scientifically documenting what some of the challenges, barriers, and wants and needs are. And we also now have a much bigger community voice than we ever had around the world because we've been trying to build it up. So we have important opportunities that we don't want to miss. So with that, I'm going to bring it to the panelists this question. What are some actual strategies? What do we do next? How do you have any ideas for strategies that some of the professional medical societies can use that we can maybe bring to them and say, hey, have you ever thought of doing this, this, and this in order to accurately represent the patient voice and patient preferences in the development of guidelines? And Sue, I'm going to start with you just because this is something I know you've been thinking about, and then open it up to all the other panelists.
Yeah, I think there are multiple avenues and like tangible ideas for how we actually include the patient voice, right? And I think, and you know, I'm kind of a dual citizen. I'm a physician advocate, but also somebody living with hepatitis B. And so it's been interesting kind of hearing perspectives from both sides. And I've definitely heard physicians say, oh, of course we include the, you know, patient perspective, like that's what we're here for. We're here to help patients. But then without realizing, they're assuming that they know what patients want. And I think that is something, if you've never had the lived experience, you can never assume what people are struggling with. And I think, you know, we as physicians see the patient in an exam room in a very like sterile environment. They're only there for like 15 minutes, 30 minutes. We have no idea what their real lives are outside of that room and how Hep B impacts their real lives with working, personal relationships. And honestly, most patients never talk to their doctors about things that really, really bother them. Self-stigma, fear of transmission. How do I talk to my sexual partner about this? There's so many other things that kind of live in this psychosocial realm. Whereas in the room with us, they're talking about, you know, liver enzymes, my viral load, tests. And so we only really see like a very small glimpse of the effect of hepatitis B on somebody's lives. So bringing in that lived experience, I think takes having representation. I think, Cami, you mentioned this. This is done in the HHS guidelines for HIV, for the hepatitis C guidelines for IDSA and AASLD. There were always representatives from the community and patients in those committees as well. And it just adds something different. But besides representation, also kind of looking at doing surveys of patients, and that's exactly what Hep B Foundation and its partners did for the WHO. So as part of the WHO guidelines, which we think is really great, there's a formalized process of including patient preferences and values as part of the assessment, you know, of the PICO questions and doing the grade methodology to be able to assess those things. And a lot of societies are doing a grade methodology for the recommendation. As part of that, you have to look at health equity, patient preferences and values. And we believe that these should just have like a more deliberate way of really incorporating patient perspective. Another way is really looking at not just liver-focused outcomes. So not just looking at HCC or cirrhosis, but we got to look at other impacts, right? Discrimination, quality of life measures. There's a growing body of evidence about looking at different quality of life measures, how it impacts somebody's ability to work. We believe fatigue is actually probably not appreciated as much as we were seeing patients report, their impact on how they feel, their outlook, their worry, right? We've been talking about a worry index, and these outcomes should be looked at, and there are more studies. So we are asking that the recommenders also look at some of these reviews that have been done on QOL. And then even just engaging communities, like once the guidelines come out or they're drafted, allow us to review and really think about things that I think the guideline makers always think about, like the impact of these recommendations, how this will impact insurers, right? Like the insurers read this and they read, I think about HCC surveillance, ultrasounds, recommended ultrasound with or without AFP, and we've had issues with getting AFP covered by insurance companies, right? So we have to think about how the impact. And then finally, partner with us so we can help disseminate these recommendations too, because we could be your biggest asset in terms of making sure there's awareness of new guidelines in the community and in our local provider community. So those are just some ideas.
Great, thank you, Sue. For any of our other panelists, do you have other specific ideas for strategies in how we can tangibly integrate patient voice into the guidelines?
Cherry, let me come in here. I think the experience of the last 1.5 or 2 years in being part of the guidelines development group has taught me the importance of having a lot of evidences from community, right? So because most of the PICO questions, the WHO, for example, do a lot of grading on all the the PICO and then the grading and also, but you see, we have very little in terms of evidence, in terms of research, in terms of the voice of the hepatitis patients really being out there, for example, in publications that will be utilized by the societies and then maybe the multilateral organizations. So this also is and I'm super happy with the work you and the Hep Foundation is doing with WHO and other partners to really have enough evidence, to have enough of the patient voices, to have publications, to have journals, right? Really bringing forth the voice and the preferences of the patients, which fits into all the processes of some of these associations, organizations in treatment guidelines. So I think it's important we, as patient and community groups, we have enough of documentation and publications of what our values and preferences are. I think that would really help to inform scientific decisions. We do a lot, but almost we're so silent. Our voices are not heard, and then so we need to really turn up the volume much more and be there in the scientific space and be there in most of the publications and research, documented evidences of voices and patients' desires. I think will also really inform the scientific community. Thank you.
I think I can build on that. A concept that gets a lot of lip service is shared decision making. And at every professional society conference, you'll have panelists talk about the importance of shared decision making, but you almost never have the other half of the shared decision making present on that panel. The person with the lived experience who's supposed to be part of this shared discussion, and I would argue that's not sharing. And so coming up with a very specific concept like this doesn't happen magically. And there is training, there's data, there's case examples, there's ways of sharing how to do this effectively that are just as important as any other scientific data-driven recommendation one might find in guidelines. And so I think finding a few areas where it's just ridiculous to not include the patient voice can sort of help open that door as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Cami, you bring up a really good point, and that is we can bring people to the table and make sure that there are people with lived experience on guideline committees, but I don't think that's the whole answer, right? How do we make sure that they are actually heard and that their voices are really meaningfully integrated? And also, what does that mean for the people with lived experience who are then going to be charged to sit on a committee surrounded by, it's them and then 25 experts and people, clinicians and researchers. And so maybe Kenneth and Wendy, you want to talk a little bit about that. If you were as a person with lived experience, how would you want to be meaningfully integrated into such a committee, for example?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shari and colleagues, for your insightful deliberations. I think the Hepatitis B Foundation is actually trying to ensure that the voices of the patients are listened to, because if we continue engaging with the societies, especially when it comes to ESO meetings, ALSD, like we had last time. So I just think that we should actually utilize those platforms, but it would actually be better if we are given a bigger platform than having the smaller meetings that the Hepatitis B Foundation organizes during those meetings. So I think advocating for the Hepatitis B Foundation to have a bigger platform, like on the bigger stage when the big meeting is actually starting, when everybody's in the room, I think that would actually give us more people to buy in our ideas and also support what the patients really feel like should be included in those guidelines.
Thank you. Wendy, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you for this. I think the patient voice definitely have to be included. And if I'm someone who's invited to sit on that committee, I mean, one of the big things is my presence there creates, helps people check their assumptions. It's the idea when a patient is there, the way of speaking about the patient in the third person, as opposed to as someone who is living in the room, it changes the dynamic of things, the conversation. And I witnessed that when I attended a recent medical society conference, where and then that's where the place, right? Someone who is an advocate can speak up. It's not that when I speak up and I share my individual experience that it's to be dismissed. Oh, well, Wendy, that's your experience. No, I think a big part of our lived experience illustrates, like bring to life, right? The what is it like? What might be some things that we might care about? So the whole idea of not making assumptions, checking people's blind sides, as much as the data scientific approach is important, and I value and really honor and appreciate that, but having a lived experience voice helps to bring in and make sure that people have a more holistic view. So one word I lead with now is when I think of hepatitis B as a liver disease, right? We're not just talking about the liver as an organ, which I know a lot of medical. Think of liver as a person living. Remember that anytime you see the word liver, it helps to bring in the holistic perspective that Dr. Wong and others have talked about. All of these other multifaceted elements that we are concerned about beyond biomarkers related to the liver. So that's why first person perspective and having that seat at the table is so important.
Thank you. So Wendy, what you're saying is that first person perspective is a biomarker. I like that. Maybe that will resonate with people. Thank you for that. And I think maybe one of the things we can take away from this discussion is as we are approaching some of the professional societies who are putting guidelines together, these are questions we can ask them. And what are their strategies? What strategies have been used before, and what strategies can we discuss with them in how to make this happen? There was a question a couple minutes ago that I wanted to get to. How can digital platforms be useful for patients to influence the patient voice in guideline development? I think that's a really interesting question, especially as we want to hear from people around the world. And I wanted to open that up to see if any of the panelists had thoughts on that. And Catherine, maybe you can reflect a little bit on the details, but one of the things that I think 2024 technology allows us to do is use technology to continue to document experiences around the world and how they differ. And so digital platforms, I think, have been useful for us, number one, in some of the surveys, the global surveys that we have done, and we can continue to do. So what we need are more people to participate. So when we put out a global survey to try and collect and document patient perspectives and patient experiences, we may get anywhere from 500 to 3,000 respondents, and that's pretty good, but there's 300 million people living with hepatitis B. So we should and could be making better use of our digital networks to get more people. I mean, wouldn't it be better if we had 50,000 people responding to these surveys? And as well as we have a discrimination survey where we document global discrimination experiences. And so I think for me, I would say that we should be leveraging our digital platforms. And as advocates in the room, how can, I can say I can fill out the survey, but can I send it through my networks so that another 1,000 people see it? And I don't know, Catherine, if anyone else had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think oh, sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
Sorry, Sue. I was just going to say, for awareness raising, I think digital platforms are very helpful. And I think our storytelling program really helps elevate that. And we're able to, I mean, Kenneth and Wendy have both participated in our storytelling program, so maybe they can speak to that and how it's impacted them. But I think it helps to really share information and make sure people don't feel alone or isolated. And it also helps with our support networks that we work with Thomas too on as well, the Hep B community. So I think there's opportunities to continue to grow and engage and make sure people don't feel isolated, and spread awareness as well. But Sue, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I was going to add on, like, I think digital is like a great potential opportunity. We definitely haven't harnessed it. I think, the media stuff is great. Obviously communications, and you see social media, there's a lot of good spread of awareness, but also, like, I think delivery of care. And this was one of our survey questions, which I don't think we brought up today, but we asked people if they'd be willing to get care through telehealth. Remember that? And I think it was like the majority of people said they'd be willing to get care that way. And it's already been done for Hep C very successfully with ECHO, just recognizing that, like, in a lot of rural areas, you don't have those specialists, right? And so that's a training the provider model. But there's also, I mean, you can go online and there's so many telehealth platforms now for so many conditions. I mean, Amazon has it, but there's, like, for almost every condition, there's a dedicated telehealth platform. And we've talked about, like, maybe this is something we can also roll out for hepatitis B, like just being able to provide access to patients, through telehealth care. And there's just more information, telehealth is great. Just the web platforms are great because now there's access to information easily, right? But I think one of the big things is, what are we, I think once you start talking about eligibility, it's so complicated, and we need to get it simplified so that patients can understand that they do have the option for treatment. I think that's something that came out of the surveys, that many patients were never told by their doctors, like, what the options were, or that they had options. They were just told, you don't need to do anything. And so they leave with this, like, false sense of security, and we lose them. Like, they don't come back for years because they've been told, like, everything's fine. But we know Hep B is such a dynamic condition, and people are going in and out. Their liver enzymes go up and down, the viral load goes up and down, and you really have to keep a close eye on them. But we have lost a lot of people to care, I think. And so we need to make it easier for people to get checked up. And we know people are going in for checkups and they get their chem panels done, but nobody orders a viral load, right? So we need to get it into the primary care providers, into our wheelhouse, to say, hey, while you're seeing that patient for diabetes and hypertension, go ahead and check a viral load. So I think there's important messaging there.
Yeah, I just want to add about the storytelling that the Hepatitis B Foundation is actually doing. So when my story ran through the digital platforms for Hepatitis B Foundation, and I shared on my personal platforms, because some of the people, not everyone who is either distant away from me knows about my status. So that helped a lot, because most of the people now who are actually positive and they never wanted to come out had the courage to, share their personal stories. And I'm glad that that opened most of the people now in my community and in the country now who are actually willing to, open up, because that is the only way we can have governments accountable and also, include hepatitis on the national health agenda. So I think such kind of platforms really play a very critical role, not only in raising awareness, but also addressing the issues of stigma and discrimination in communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do have one question that I wanted to bring up because I'm very interested to hear people's perspectives. What role does the private sector play in these advocacy efforts and in terms of treatment access? And that is one key stakeholder we haven't yet brought up today. So if anyone has any thoughts from the panel session, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the categories of private sectors that we are referring to, because, for example, if you look at the pharmaceutical industry as a private sector, they are trying to support some of the patient organizations in the region through giving them grants that can actually help them strengthen their local advocacy. And I think that is one of the critical roles that the private sector can actually do. But also, we have seen other private sectors, in fact, even some of the pharmaceutical companies during the Global Resource Mobilization Conference in Geneva, whereby Heathrow and some other, I think, pharma company had to reduce the price of hepatitis of tenofovir half the price that was initially being given. And I think that is very critical for the private sector to continue, playing such critical role, because access is very key. Even when you manufacture drugs and they are not accessible to the people who need them, it doesn't make any business sense for these private companies to continue talking about the medications that they manufacture, but when they cannot be accessible. Thank you.
Harry, let me also chime in that private sector, for example, in the healthcare sector, there are, in different countries have different setup, and then the way they operate. And I think in most LMICs, I think maybe in the hepatitis space, we probably have not really done so much in bringing the private healthcare providers as partners in the advocacy and partners in improving access to care. But like Kenneth said, the private sector, that is the pharma, they're doing their bit in terms of access. But I think a lot more could be done in improving access, in reducing cost, and in making sure that patients are empowered and are really involved in clinical trials, are involved in drug research, are involved in even most of their programs to ensure that the voice of the voiceless are heard. So across most Africa, I think it's something we need to look around to really strengthen the role of private sector in improving access to care, because in some places, about 50% of patients or 60% access care at that level of care. Especially, I'm saying, for example, in Nigeria, you have about 40% of people accessing care at that level. So it's a very important sector that we need to really engage actively, because quite some of them are the profit making. And so for them, reducing costs would be losing business. And then, so how do we bring them? How do we make patient voice to really engage them actively to see, because how they could really work to improve access to care. But I think that's something we need to really be very intentional about and ensuring that they are part of the main puzzle. Then there's something I want to say, Chari, about the hepatitis B. Anybody living hepatitis B faces this puzzle of treatment, right? Unfortunately for hepatitis B, when you first diagnosed, you are really more confused, not knowing what to do. You don't, the psychological, the treatment, the navigating the treatment journey. And it's very important to really have clinicians that are empathic and then have the sense of empathy to explain and tell patients, the journey. And it's a big puzzle that, hepatitis B have always been treated as a liver disease, which it is. And I think that's the aspect where patients have always not been considered as experts. It's only the gastros that are the experts, and patients are only as tools, So I love what Wendy said earlier, that the person should be, the people-centered care should be considered. You're looking at an individual that has emotions, that has feelings, that have relationships, that is thinking about, is there no health insurance for treatment? Do I prefer pills? Do I prefer injectables? So the whole lot of things that goes through in the minds of the patient, the treatment journey, which options, for example, hepatitis B, we don't have so many options in treatment. You have in Africa, Nigeria, you have only in Turkey, you have only tenofovir, you have no many options. In the HIV space, there are so many options for patients of drugs and treatment to take. So these are things that is always in the head of the patient, and I think it's important. These are the most reason why it's really important to look at the individual and not just the disease that people are treating, and to have the patient really involved in every aspect of decision making. And I'd like to say this again, sorry for doing that, that sometimes beyond just having patients on panels to give lived experience, I mean, it's a bit tokenism to have just someone just share, and then patients are not involved in service delivery, in providing services, in rolling out even policies. I've said this in Geneva, one of the meetings, that we want beyond just story, beyond just lived experience or sharing experiences, we want to be involved, right? People with lived experience should be involved, should be directly involved in service delivery, should be directly involved in the guidelines development, in even service delivery, based on what the GHS said, empowered communities. The empowered communities is not only for people with lived experience picking up in the lived experience and it stops at the panel. So this is very important because countries are getting global fund catering, but people with lived experience are not in the table. They are not there to make decisions as to, they're not there to provide their input. They're not there as part of service delivery. They're not there as part of, people that are should be in the driving seat, So it's good that the patient in the community are empowered, not just to share stories, but to be directly involved in every aspect of clinic and of service delivery. Thank you, Anova.
Thank you very much, Danjuma, for that. So I wanted we have about 6 minutes left, and I wanted to pivot a little bit into next steps and open it up to the panelists. We have a really great discussion going on in the chat, and one of the things I'd like to say is it seems as though there's a lot of people who are very interested in speaking out and speaking up and helping. And so for anyone who is on this that hasn't yet joined efforts and want to, please reach out to us, and we are very happy to integrate folks into any strategies that we can. But for the panelists, what do you see are next steps? What are we taking away from this webinar, and what would you like to see happen next? If you have guideline developers in the room, what are you saying to them, and what do you want to do next as a group? And I'm happy to start with anyone who wants to go first.
Sure, I can go.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one message I would like to deliver. Currently, the HBV guidelines across, these medical societies, WHO, need to be simplified. It's too complicated. It needs to be simplified. And the eligibility criteria for people to qualify or say, hey, for treatment, that needs to be changed. And I've kind of given this analogy, people who are eligible right now at there's a funnel for people. The guidelines set up who is eligible. And then through this shared decision-making process, patients will talk to their doctors. And then out of that, some people may decide not right now, treatment's not right. And other people will get treatment. But fundamentally, the way the guidelines are set up today, this funnel is too narrow at the top. And what I'm advocating for and asking for, it's a wider funnel, a bigger funnel, where the eligibility criteria, right, at the top, it makes it easier. Then more patients and their doctors can have that personalized decision-making. And then ultimately, more people can have that choice and decision of figuring out what is right and what is not. So that would be one very specific ask of anyone here listening on demand, in terms of we need to make the funnel bigger at the top.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. So I think for the few last months, the WHO has promised that they are actually reviewing the current treatment guidelines. But I think it is taking much longer for them to have these reviewed guidelines launched for public use. And I think now I would be more interested in knowing when they are going to launch these guidelines, because we cannot wait. We have less than seven years to 2030, and the responsibility is on us to push WHO to do their work, because I mean they are meant to do this. I mean, if they can't have the guidelines launched, then they should communicate formally to the patients or the societies, because it has dragged on and we do not know exactly what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy and Kenneth. Any other panelists like to
Yeah,
talk about this?
yeah. So thanks, Cherry, and again for inviting me. So I would like to say that I think we need to turn up the volume more. We need to shout more. We need to talk more. We need to have collective, advocacy, and we need to probably also look at champions in other space and bring them into this. We need to really go out. We need to build more networks, right? And expand our scope, expand the network, get more people to as allies to help us really shout. I think we're shouting, but we need to shout louder. And let's push for more people to be tested and screened. Please, we need to do a lot about that. If we want really to turn the curve in hepatitis to achieve this elimination, more people need to be screened, more people need to be tested, and let's increase awareness. There's a lot of misinformation about hepatitis, trust me, across the community. So a lot more so, and congratulations, HB Foundation. Thanks for the great work you're doing. And yeah, I look forward to better collaborations. Thank you, and over.
And there's an important cultural change that needs to happen with the providers as well. I think Wendy alluded to this idea that when you are in the room, it changes how people respond. And I've watched providers in various specialties evolve over time. Those of us who were in HIV care in the 90s expected that people with lived experience would be involved in our guidelines, in our panels. And I think all of the tactics that you all are describing, getting in there, talking, kind of culturally changing the expectation of involvement will actually change the dynamics.
I have just one simple ask in addition to the other stuff we talked about, is that that we also get some alignment across the guidelines too, because it is very confusing to the global treating community. Obviously, the guidelines do have to focus on their intended audience, but it often, because there's so many different thresholds for ALT and viral load, it can also create confusion so that people don't want to take on Hep B at all as providers. And so we do think, some movement and an alignment into the treatment guidelines would be very, very helpful.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, everyone. And I know we have a minute and we're just jumping off, but my final thought is sort of a response to a reflection from Vivian, who put something in there. And what is the Hep B Foundation doing to make sure that people with hepatitis B feel seen and feel heard? And you hit it right on the head. That's what we do. We are, and I just want to remind everyone on here, the Hepatitis B Foundation is 12 people. We are tiny. And this is why we need the voices of people, all of the stakeholders together to raise awareness and attention and to be strong voices. We cannot do it alone, but we really are doing all of this work to make sure that people feel seen and feel heard. And I want to end by saying this is just the beginning of the discussion. We will continue to be working. We have, as a small group, we've reached out to the guidelines committees to try and engage them and discuss with them. And we want to thank everyone for making this a priority and for helping us through that process. And we will see progress over time. We are going to stick with it, and we know you all will too. I want to thank our panelists today very much for joining us and sharing your expertise and sharing your thoughts and experiences. You are the reason that we'll be able to make it happen. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.